Based on family and friends, I always felt like I was way behind, decades behind. I knew lots of people who were buying houses in their 20s, late 20s, and my sisters have both purchased houses. So I definitely felt very, very late to the game.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you were doing before you started your purchase journey?
Sure. So my name is Chris Moore. I'm from Charlotte, but I have traveled around quite a bit over the past few years. So I finished about 10 years in Europe. I was living in London for 7 years and then Poland for about 2.5, almost 3 years. And at the end of my time in Poland is when COVID started. And that was what got me thinking about moving back to the United States. And that started my journey back to the US. And I came back. I lived in Washington, D.C. for a year. And that was when I decided that I was like, I need to start thinking about buying a house. I wasn't quite sure where I wanted to land yet, but I knew that I didn't necessarily need to be in DC. I was getting a little bit more stabilized and just starting to think about really settling somewhere and just have that whole mindset about getting a property. And yeah.
And because of COVID, you were able to work remote. So I'm sure that made it a lot easier to make a decision. So why not DC and why North Carolina?
So the story is basically that. So I was in DC. I was there for a job, and that job I thought needed to have me close to government clients. And it turned out over the course of the year, I was working primarily remotely. I had one or two meetings that were even in DC. And I realized I didn't necessarily need to be there to work and do my job well.
About what you were paying for rent before you decided, okay, it's time to buy something.
So in DC, I believe I was paying about $2,300 for, at the time, it's a two-bedroom apartment. And it was in Arlington, Virginia. Slightly older building, but still very nice area. I liked it, but it was a significant amount of money to be paying for just kind of a small apartment. And DC's just never really been my favorite city. I've lived in a lot of different cities. I wanted something a little bit slower than that pace of DC. I wanted a little bit more space than I thought I'd be able to get in the properties that are in and around DC. So I actually started my journey by looking in Florida.
Yes.
That became shortened when that deal fell through. There were some repairs that the previous owner just didn't want to cover that were uncovered in the inspection. So I backed out of that contract, and then I just decided to kind of move back to North Carolina. My parents live in North Carolina. I grew up in North Carolina. I thought I could spend a little bit of time with them while I figured out what I wanted to do next and regroup. And that's kind of how I made it back to North Carolina.
So how did it feel as an adult to feel like, okay, well, I'm a backup to go forward, moving back in with mom and dad to get yourself together? I think a lot of people may not feel as comfortable doing that and say, oh, well, I'll stay where I am until I'm ready to purchase. So what was that like? Was it worth it?
It's an interesting question. It's one I have thought about. I don't think everybody comes to the same answer that I do. For me, it was worth it. I was about 40 years old at the time. I was fortunate. I have a very great relationship with my parents. They have a basement that was plenty of space that would still give me the privacy that I needed and the space that I needed. So that worked out really well. For me, it was very much making the right decisions to take the big steps forward. I think sometimes people get stuck in I gotta have this right now. I refuse to ever have to live like this. Sometimes a short-term sacrifice can have a long-term payout.
Yeah.
And I think for my personal case, that was absolutely what worked out for me.
I think we looked at maybe 4 houses,
At least, yes.
about 4 houses, but none of them were really hitting your goal, right?
Right. And I had a lot of it was, okay, I can maybe make this work. What about some more renovations? How can I squeeze out what I'm looking for? And that was a lot of compromise.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I really wanted to compromise that much, but I felt I just didn't have a choice. So that's what I kind of kept looking at.
And you always have a choice. And then something very interesting happened.
Oh,
Let's talk
yes.
about how you ended up finding the house that you currently own.
Sure. So, like I said, I have a great relationship with my parents. Speaking to my dad, we're just kind of out in the yard, just doing some work. And he's like, I do a lot of work with Roger. He's the guy who lives across the street. And he was saying that they're looking to move back to Texas sometime next year. He and his wife, they sold a business here. Their kids are all out of the house. There's nothing really tying them here. They've got family and connections in Texas, so they're looking to move back to Texas. And I didn't think much of it. I was like, okay, so what's that got to do with me? Like, next year is a good way away from now, and that's a big house over there. I don't really know Roger like that. And I mean, I kind of feel like, most people just sell their house the traditional way, put it on the market and go sell it. And he's like, well, you should go talk to him anyway. And to appease my father, I kind of went over one day, knocked on the door. It's like, hi, I just kind of wanted to stop by. I know my dad said that you all might be moving or things. I've been in the market for looking for a house. I know it was a long shot, but I just thought I would come over and just kind of ask the question so I have an answer and I can go back and tell my dad. And then he kind of said, well, we weren't looking to move right now, like your dad says, kind of sometime next year. Next year was probably still a good 6 to 8 months away at that time. So it wasn't a very near situation. But I said, okay, that's fine. And I kind of left. And probably a week and a half, 2 weeks later, he calls me back. He just says, my wife and I have been thinking about this, and if you're serious, we'd like to have a conversation with you.
Yeah. And then when you decided to purchase and you met Roger and started having the conversations, what was that like in terms of like your deciding to do a loan? Because I know initially you were planning to finance.
Right, 100% fine. I was planning to do that the entire time. Even with Roger, I'd planned on financing. I think that actually helped the situation out because when he called me back and said, we'd like to have a conversation, how serious are you? I was able to provide a pre-approval letter from my bank. So I could say, I've had my credit run. It's good credit. The bank's willing to give me this amount of money. I've got the letter. I've been in this process. So this isn't the first house. I'm not just here starting to talk. I was under contract previously. It just didn't work out. So I am serious. And if I can find a house that I like, I'm ready to make a move and make an offer and move on it. So that was very helpful in that situation.
So at the time, what were you pre-approved for?
$475,000.
475. And all of the properties that we looked at was in that price range. Now, when you started talking to Roger about his home, I know it was a larger home than what we were looking at. So let's go back to how the conversation progressed after he found out that you were serious.
Right. So at that point, we started off by kind of having a conversation about what I might be looking for and things I wanted in a home. He gave me a tour of his house. So we walked together to go through and saw everything. He let me kind of take a few pictures just so I could kind of refer back to it. And he just kind of gave me the history. They're the original owners of the house. It was being built. The previous owners weren't able to finish constructing it. So he came in, finished it. So they're the only ones who've ever lived in the house. And I knew that he was a very handy person. So I knew he took care of a lot of things and did a lot of things. So that was kind of how the conversation started. Then it was like, yes, I'm still interested. It has everything. It ticks all my boxes, and it actually did. I was kind of surprised.
What were the main things that you liked about this home that you felt like checked all your boxes?
One of them was I always wanted to have gas in the house. So I have a gas stove, which I enjoy cooking, and I think that's just a nice perk to make cooking easier. I've always wanted a gas fireplace, and this had the gas fireplace already set up, so that was perfect. The other thing that was really big is I wanted some sort of guest suite. So a spare bedroom and a bathroom that was not something that I'd be using or it's not part of like the family area. Something that if I had friends or other family members come, they felt they had their own private space. And he actually had that. There was a kind of a separate floor that just had a whole bedroom, it had a sitting area and its own private bathroom. And that was really the piece that put me over the top.
This is a really big house. What is the square footage footprint of this house? Because it's pretty big.
It's about 3,400 square feet. It's a 5 bedroom, 3.5 bath house. So it is fairly sizable, I will admit. But it was, and in fairness, I was never looking for something that large. Everything else I was looking at was significantly smaller.
Smaller.
But because we could get the numbers to work out well, and because of the proximity to my parents, it's literally across the street from my parents, I was happy to pay even a little premium for that. There was some added advantage to having somebody that close. I can keep an eye on them, and I travel a good bit for work, so they come over and they can get my mail and take care of things while I'm out, and it works out really well, I think, for both sides. And then we sat down and we had to just be very open and transparent. And I was like, this is what I think I can afford from a purchase price. And I'd be looking to put X amount down. I'd be looking to, like, I need to keep my monthly payments in a certain range. And then we said, well, how do we figure out what the purchase price of the house is? So both of us are happy because he early on did not want to bring realtors in. And that was a decision that I was able to at least say, okay, let's start that way. Let's see if we can figure this out. That would save us both some money. And that process, since it wasn't going to go on the market and we didn't have to do the showings and the listing and all of that. And we just had to get really serious about how we figure out how much it's going to cost.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. You mentioned that there was a certain amount that you wanted to put down. There was a certain amount that you felt comfortable with monthly at the time. What was that?
So I wanted to put 10% down. I knew that in my head, I know that 20% is usually that magic number. And if you're doing investment properties and things, they still usually require that. But I wanted to put something that I felt put something down, get some equity in the house right away. I know there are some loans that can go down to 5%, or they used to do the zero money down. I would never feel comfortable doing that because I feel like it's just too risky to start that process off with very little equity. So that was where I didn't really go that road. And so that was why I had that in mind. Dollar wise, I was hoping to keep it closer to, say, I think it was about $2,600 a month, which is what I kind of felt comfortable paying. And that was my goal to
Yeah.
do that.
Now, the average person puts down between 3 and 3.5%, but that means you were doing a little bit of saving. That means you had really prepared for to purchase something.
I had been thinking about this for a while. I've been saving up my money. I have been going through this process. So I've lived in a lot of other cities, and this was just a good time to settle down now.
So then when you guys started talking about what you were going to pay for the house, what did he want versus what you were willing to pay?
So the way we figured out how much to list the house for was we both agreed we would get the house appraised, and what it appraised for would be the sale price. And to this day, I'm still not 100% sure it's the best way to go, but it was a method that I thought at least brought an impartial person in that neither of us knew. He allowed me to choose the appraiser. And then he was there when the appraiser came to walk the house, just to make sure the appraiser had access and could see everything. So that was our agreement. And that's what we did. And the appraisal actually came out at $500,000 even. However, turned out the appraiser made a mistake in the square footage when he was calculating it, which was caught. And Roger was like, I don't think this is right. That particular floor has these dimensions. I had measured it before. He provided a footprint. The other guy came out, they redid it, and Roger was correct. The other measurement was wrong. He reappraised it, and actually the value came out at $516,000,
Ooh, okay.
which was more
Then you wanted to pay.
wanting to pay. I had the pre-approval for 475, and I was a little surprised, probably slightly disappointed. I was like, oh, so
A little
close.
shaken and stirred.
Yeah, it was just like, well, gave it a try, good old college try, as they say, and it just may not be the one. Wasn't a lot of money sunk into the process, just had to pay the appraiser. I was very upfront and comfortable, and I was like, that's just more than I was prepared to pay. And I just don't know how to make that work.
If you're thinking, I have no idea where to start, then I got you. Check the link in the description below for the 7 things that you should know before applying for a mortgage. Go ahead, take the first step. Click the link, drop your email, and we'll get that guide right to you. Now let's get back to the episode.
And he's like, I understand. I appreciate the fact that you're upfront and you know what you're comfortable with. I'm not trying to put you in a situation that this doesn't work out. So we kind of shook hands and I just kind of left a little, disappointed. Because
Yeah.
I kind of stood there and was like, oh, I could do a lot with this house. It's right across the street. All these things are
You had
amazing.
already started dreaming.
Exactly.
Planning.
Exactly. So, and that was kind of where it sat. And I left and I was like, I'm comfortable. That was the right decision. Probably another 2 weeks later, he calls me back and he's like, I've been thinking about this. And I had a conversation with my wife and I've got an idea and I'd like to run this idea past you. I said, sure. I came back over. Don't know what this is going to be, but I'm happy to listen. And that was when he actually says, like, what about if we finance it for you? I'm like, I'm not sure I'm following. He say more. And that's where we kind of went to this conversation. And basically, it's called owner financing. He was in a fortunate spot where he didn't particularly need the cash on hand to buy his next property. He'd already been building it. He had that going. He'd sold a business. He was fine. Actually, in the process, if I did give him all of this money for the sale of the house, he's going to go pay taxes on it.
Yeah.
So I guess in this process, and he's thinking about it, he's like, well, what if we just finance, so we act as the bank, and then we basically give you the mortgage, and then you pay us back. And I said, that's a very interesting idea. How do we kind of work that out? So we kind of started going through numbers and things like that. And ultimately, he said, I'm not particularly concerned with how much money you put down. Put down nothing if you want. I don't particularly care. There's no penalty or anything for that. And I was like, that's nice. I still want to put something down, but that was very helpful. And then we had a discussion about how much the payments would be and what's the interest going to be and a little bit of all that. So we actually settled on kind of finding what we thought the interest rate was at the moment. And then he provided 1% less than that, a whole percent less.
Okay. So let's stop and talk about the interest rate.
Okay.
So we're at $516,000. We didn't negotiate that price. We just said, okay, that's the appraisal that we're going with that.
Well, that was the appraisal price, and that
Okay.
was the price we were going with. However, he also came back and said that because we weren't using realtors, which usually the seller is the person who pays the realtors, so he's the person who would have to take 6% off of the sale price that I gave him. But he said, since you also agreed to not use a realtor, we will split that. So I got a 3% savings on that house, and it took me down to just about 500 again.
Okay.
And then he got a 3% savings, he got to keep that money in his pocket. So we both got to win. And I actually really appreciated that he saw the fairness of that. And it also made me feel a little more comfortable to say, okay, there's some value to me not using a realtor.
Exactly.
And I know there's risk to that as well.
Definitely. But you guys were able to work it out and you used an attorney. Interest rate.
Interest rate. So interest rate, I believe the interest rate at that time was about it was high. It was really high. I think it was about 6.7, somewhere around there. And we agreed actually about 5.5. So just under, a little over 1% below.
Yeah. Well, that was good. That worked out.
Fantastic.
And because he didn't need the cash, and that was his reasoning for being willing to go ahead and finance for you, because capital gains, right? You said capital gains, and he also would not have to pay a big chunk in taxes.
That's part of it.
Okay.
There's one more big part, huge part for him. All of the money I would have paid to the bank in interest, he now gets. Honestly, I don't even really want to know the number of how much it was, but people say if you had a mortgage for $500,000 and then you go in and you pay interest on that after 30 years, you've paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest to
That's
the
right.
bank.
That's right.
That money now goes to him in his pocket.
In terms of being able to refinance at some point, let's say the interest rate goes down to 3%. Is there a repayment penalty or an early payment penalty? What is your finance length of time for your finance?
So it's a 30-year fixed interest mortgage.
Okay.
We had this discussion, and I say, what happens if the interest rate drops? I have to be able to do that. And in his mind, he felt like, well, if you do that, then I start losing all this money off of interest. And I was like, that's fine. And I understand where you're coming from. But ultimately, I could just go refinance with the bank, go through that process, and let them pay you off. You still got all of the money for the sale of the house, and I can go and accept that lower interest rate. So ultimately, we agreed to two things. One, that if we ever got to the point of wanting to refinance, he gets first right of refusal. So if I came and say, hey, I've got a letter from a bank, they would give me a 3% interest rate. I'm going to show that to you. You can decide if you want to agree to that or not, but you at least know that I have another option that I could go off and do. So that was that was one piece of it. The second piece was actually a slight prepayment penalty. And basically, I think it was $10,000 if I prepaid early, but over the course of 4 years, that goes down from 10,000 to zero. So
Okay.
every single month, that number gets smaller and smaller. So now I'm 2 years into it. It'd only be $5,000 of a prepayment penalty if I sold the house early and I left. And the reason for it kind of going in that direction that way is because that would allow him to get more money early on because he's making most of his interest in the first few years
Yes.
as I'm paying it, and that number goes down through an amortization schedule. So that's why he would get that penalty up front after 4 years. He's kind of at least felt he would have regained enough of the money to feel comfortable that even if I did refinance or decide to sell the house or whatever happened, it wasn't a waste of his time or anything of that nature.
So what did your monthly payment end up being?
So my current payment is $2,800.
Okay, so that's not
I
too
was able
yeah.
to squeeze it in there and kind of make it work out. And part of what helped is that I actually was able to keep some of the money I would have spent. So one of the other perks of doing this is he did not think I needed to pay any closing costs. So something you may be paying $10,000 to a bank in closing cost fees and all of that.
You didn't have
He's
to
like,
pay.
I don't have a need for that.
Did you do an inspection, a property inspection?
I did do an inspection just to make sure there's nothing that was out of the ordinary. There was nothing that surprised me. He was very open and honest about everything. So there was nothing that I was super worried about. It's still an older home. I believe it was built in 1993. So it's still a slightly older home, but it still had very good bones. And he was somebody who took care of the property. So.
What was your biggest apprehension?
At the time, I think the biggest thing is being locked into something. I've always rented. I've always been able to move. I've lived in many different cities in this country. I've lived in other countries. Like the ability to say, you know what, I'm kind of tired of this. I'm out and just go somewhere else. That's just always been part of like my life to know that I'm like, okay, this decision, I've got to be okay living on this street for a while. And that was kind of a concern of mine to like, well, what if I change my mind in a year? What if I change my mind in 2 years? Like, it becomes expensive to have to try to sell and go through all this process. And I don't know how much upkeep is going to cost. I'm used to renting. If something breaks, I call somebody, they fix it. My water heater breaks, I can't call anybody. I can call somebody to fix it, but I'm paying for it. So those were the little things that were kind of like in the back of my head. And that was where I was really trying to be very cautious on how much I was spending in mortgage payments and things like that. Like I knew I probably could have gone further, but I didn't want to because I just didn't know. The unknown was a worry for me. So I was trying to be slightly cautious.
How did you overcome it then? Like, what was that thing that made you say, you know what, I'm comfortable with this. I've chosen the right place and I can do this.
I'd say probably two things. One, my spreadsheet. So I made a spreadsheet. I put in I did a budget of my own. So this is how much money I make. This is what I'm spending on. This is what I think my expenses would be with this house. What are the property taxes? What do I think the utilities are? I asked them for utility bills, so I actually knew what they were paying for electric and gas and water. So I was going through that whole process to try to get as comfortable with how much this is actually going to cost,
Yeah.
and then being able to say, okay, I still have the padding. Can I still save money for retirement? Can I still save money for the fun things I want to do? Can I still do all of that? So when the numbers worked out, that was a huge part of it. And I think the second part was I didn't feel I was compromising on any of the things I really wanted to have in a house. So the things, all those kind of, I really want to have this, I really want to have that, I really want to have that. It had those things. So I felt a little more comfortable walking in and say, yes, it's probably got a few more bedrooms that I need, but if I have friends come over, family come over, they're going to have plenty of space. They will feel comfortable here. I will feel comfortable having them here. And that was really an important piece for me.
Yeah, and you can't beat equity, right? So I'm sure right now your home is worth much more than you paid for it in this current environment.
I would believe so. I've done a little work around there, cleaned up a few things and some renovations and parts. So yeah, I think overall it's still more valuable than I had paid for.
So now you didn't have to pay closing costs. So I know that you did some renovations. Was that the money you were able to use to make those renovations? And what were they? And how much did you end up spending in terms of your renovation?
So I did renovations in two pieces, and the closing cost money, that was a nice chunk of the money. I also knew I had some money saved off to the side. Even if I bought a house normally without this house, I still knew whatever house I bought, I was going to have to invest a little bit into it just to really make it my own. So in this particular house, I redid all of the floors. So the ground level had all of the, it had different types of materials. They were all taken out, and there were just LVP put across the entire floor. And then I had carpet all the way upstairs. That was probably the biggest thing I did before moving in. Other than that, it was just some painting. Was most of everything else that I did just to kind of freshen it up. And so that was the big piece, and I did that before I moved in. And that was actually probably about $20,000. There was a lot of floors to, to do. And then the other thing that needed to be done was renovating the master bathroom. That was a project that he was going to be starting, and that they wanted to do as well. And they'd actually gotten to the part of demoing it out. So they'd gotten everything out, but they hadn't gotten to the part of actually putting things in. And then as we started the conversations, there was no point in them really starting that process. So that was an unfinished bathroom when I bought the house. And since there were other bathrooms that were nearby, I was like, I'm not going to worry about that now. I need to get all the bits and pieces, the floors and everything in and getting comfortable. And it was probably 4 or 5 months after I was living there that I started looking into renovating the bathroom. And that was actually probably another between 10 to 15,000.
Yeah, because we talked about it. We talked about the fact that it does, everything doesn't have to be done overnight. You're an owner now, right? And I know a lot of people have, questions about the fact you brought it up. I can always call somebody if I have a problem, right? I'm going to have to pay for these home repairs. So, in retrospect and having that thought process, do you feel like the equity you've gained, or what have you gained specifically that makes you say it's worth, fixing my water heater? It's worth making these repairs to my home versus the money that I spend every year in rent where I'm getting absolutely nothing back. Can you speak to that?
Yes. So I have zero regrets about anything in this process, and I'm very happy for that. For me, coming in and having a home of my own, being able to choose what I want to put on the walls, I changed out light fixtures. I changed out even just light switches and sockets because I want a different color. I want a different shape. The ability to kind of make it my own was really nice. It was the first time I've really felt like this is mine. I don't have to ask anybody questions. I'm not worried about, ooh, well, I'm gonna have to paint this over if I move out at some point. I'm not worried about that. I was able to do things in the yard that I wanted to, I don't like the ivy. I'm going to pull that out. I'm going to cut this little tree down. I'm going to plant some plants over here. Like I enjoyed being able to bring my creativity and myself to where I live.
Yeah.
And there's a different pride. Like I walk through the house and sometimes I just kind of come home and it's like you just kind of look at the house or you're walking through it and it's like, this is mine. Like this isn't somebody else's. This is mine. And I don't have to ask permission for this or that. And it's a very comforting feeling. And I know that this is going to be part of, like, say, my retirement package in another few decades, that the money that I'm spending on paying this off, it's still building more and more and more equity in this. I can use that equity at some other point to go buy something else, to add in as a rental property or a vacation house or whatever. But it's really nice to know that I'm actually earning in different ways. As the house appreciates, I'll make more money. As I pay the mortgage down, I'll make more money. And just the comfort of living there and not having to pay extra costs for maintenance because, like, even though a water heater may cost, say, $1,000 to repair, that maintenance company at our apartment place might be paying more than that to have somebody else to come in. You're going to pay that, and you're covering all these extra fees to make sure that they can come and replace it quickly. And they get to choose whatever they want to put in there. They can put a top of the line one in there because they know it's going to last for 15 other renters to come after, and you can choose something different for your own house. So I like that ability to choose what's going to go in, and I try to choose quality products that are going to last for a while so I don't have to keep messing with it.
And you just brought up a really important point, and that is when you're renting, especially if you're in like a nice rental or a luxury rental, you're paying all these additional fees that there's no upside for you in it, right? Talk about the tax advantages, because I think that's a big thing that people don't realize who've never purchased a home. The difference between at the end of the year what they've paid in rent and the value of what they've paid in a mortgage, the difference in terms of your equity bringing down your overall, but also the tax advantages.
There's a tax advantage. So you get to write off the interest on what you pay for your mortgage, which, especially in the first year, can be quite significant. I believe it's around $30,000 to just write off based on the interest that I paid. Now, it's makes you also realize how little you paid toward the mortgage that first year that actually hit the principal, but that starts to change significantly kind of as the years go. But I get to write this off. I would be paying that interest to somebody anyway. Mm-hmm. So as far as I'm concerned, like Roger and I, we're still friends. When he comes to town, we go out to dinner together. So I feel like, hey, if somebody's going to get this money anyway, I'd prefer go to a friend than just go to a bank.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of things. So that tax advantage is definitely a very helpful piece of it. As well.
Well, you found a very unique way to buy a home. And I'm sure a lot of people had not even thought about this as a viable option where the owner would actually finance the property. And for him to be in such a unique position to be able to do that is amazing. You bring something quite different to the conversation. Now, for anybody who is thinking about purchasing, a little bit afraid of the process, what would you say to them?
At least for me, I think when I'm concerned about going into a new process I don't understand, I do a lot of research. I ask questions to people who have done this before. So I ask questions to other people who bought houses. I didn't necessarily know a lot about owner financing, so I Googled it and I would read up on it. This is a real thing. This isn't something this guy just made up as a whim. Oh, here's some different ways other people have done it and some of the criteria they might have put in place. Because there is a risk. There's a risk to Roger as the previous owner. If I stop paying, he's still the bank. He's got to go through the foreclosure process. He has to get the house back. And that's a lot of time and effort he doesn't really have and want to put into it. So he has to make sure that he trusts me. And he would not have done this with just anybody. So it's not that he would have, if anybody else came and said, hey, I just happened to see a listing, I'd like to buy the house. There's no way he would have done that. So I think that helps and you do that. But I really felt like I had to just do my research. And in an age today where you even have like AI as a huge asset, just have a conversation, start asking questions. And I would ask questions and I would do just a lot of Googling and research. And I don't think I knew anybody else who have done it before, but I was able to find a lot of information. And even when I started talking to my lawyer, because still have to go through a lawyer and do the closing, and that was part of our deal, we'd both have our own lawyers. His lawyers would write the documents up, mine would review it, and we'd split the cost of having the documents created. And I asked questions to my lawyer about this. Like, is this weird? He's like, no, this is all fairly standard things. And here's some questions you might want to ask just to make sure you're comfortable. And that was really what brought me a lot closer to being okay, saying, yes, let's do this.
You mentioned that you were 40 when you started the process. What was that like for you from a psychological standpoint? Did you feel like, ooh, I should have done this 5 years ago, or I'm a little bit behind? Or did you feel like, okay, this is a perfect time for me to start moving in that direction?
I will say that based on family and friends, I always felt like I was way behind, decades behind. I knew lots of people who were buying houses in their 20s, late 20s, and my sisters have both purchased houses. So I definitely felt very, very late to the game. But for me, I also felt that just for my own personal life, the way I chose to live, it didn't bother me. I made choices, and I was not going to go back and regret the choices that I made. I lived in New York for a while, and that was a place I'm like, I just don't want to buy a place in New York. I just couldn't see spending that much money on something so small. Then I moved to London, which is basically the same situation. And then I moved to Poland, and I'm like, I'm not living here long enough to want to set down roots in Poland. So by the time I got back, it had to feel like the right time for me. And I was still saving along the way. And because I was still saving money, that was what allowed me to be in this position to act on an opportunity that was kind of presented. So that was why I was really fortunate to say it wasn't that I just got lucky that he was willing to do that. I was also in a position where I had taken good care of my credit. I'd been saving money to put down a down payment. I knew if I had to do some repairs, I had a little money set aside to do the repairs so I don't move into a house. And then I hate it because I can't do anything with it and everything's too expensive. And I have to go out and take out more loan and more debt to try to repair basic things. So I tried to be prepared for the situation, and I think that really helped me step into it confidently. So yes, something I probably might have liked to do a few years earlier, but I have no regrets.
So that just goes to show that it's never too late.
It's never too
Right.
late.
So if you're 40, 45, 50, even there are people who purchase in retirement, that's the very first home that they've ever owned is in retirement. So it's just never too late.
Right.
But it definitely makes a difference, right? To your well-being, your stability. It's a ladder to upward mobility and building generational wealth.
It does. Just gotta find the time that works for you. And if it's not that time, then at least be working to make sure you're getting towards that right time in the future.
Yeah, because I always say the renter builds wealth for the owner.
That is true.
That you are paying a mortgage, even when you think you're paying rent. You're just not paying your mortgage.
That is very true.
You're paying your landlord's mortgage.
That is very true.
Chris, it was such a pleasure. I thank you so much for coming and sharing your unique experience. I think that people will, a big takeaway, right? That there's more than one way to purchase a home, and there's no one right way. There's not a wrong way. It's just your way. So thank you. I appreciate you coming to buy back your life.
Thank you very much for having me.
So please make sure that you like, share, and subscribe this episode with someone who might find this information valuable. Thank you for joining us, and we want to help you buy back your life. Thanks for joining me on the Buy Back Your Life podcast. For more ways to realize your dream of homeownership, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel.